Going live. We'd like to welcome you to the Donnie Glover Show. We're here with the one and only Doug Gansler. Good evening, sir.
Good evening. My audio is not great, but I can hear you.
Oh, we hear you just fine. We hear you just fine. How's your day going?
It's going well. I've been traveling, so I was on a streak where I was in Baltimore for all day. I think last week, and then the next day I was in Hagerstown and Cumberland. The next day I was in Southern Maryland, Calvert County, Leonardtown. The next day I was in Frederick and Laurel. So just it's nice to have a little break, a little chill time. Watch some of the famous Idaho Potato Bowl and all kinds of stuff.
And what are the people saying on the campaign trail?
Well, I'm hearing two things, Donnie. I'm hearing one is that people want someone with experience. They recognize we're in a time of crisis, that is COVID. People want someone that's led before in times of crisis, in terms of being the Democratic nominee and ultimately the governor. And then the second is just that. They want someone that can be the Democratic nominee and can win the governor's race. And I think, we've lost two in a row in very, very Democratic years. And next year is going to be the most Republican year of our lifetime. And they want someone that can actually win, get the governor's chair back. And particularly in Baltimore. I mean, Baltimore is the place of all the 24 jurisdictions in the state that desperately needs a governor to work with leadership and leaders like yourself to determine how can the state work with the city to provide access to opportunity for people who live in Baltimore, around Baltimore, in terms of public health, education, jobs, criminal justice, and affordable housing. So those are all issues that I think people are looking for, and we got to make sure we have someone that can actually win the general election.
We've been joined by Doc Cheatham. Is the question I wanted to pose to you and others who are to be joining us. Doc, good evening. How are you?
I'm doing good, and look like you got a longtime friend on the radio or TV, whatever you call what you got. How have you been, my friend?
I'm doing well. It's great to see you. I did not know you were going to be on, so
I didn't know you were in. It's good to see you and hear you.
It's good to be seen. It's a special treat. So, Doc Cheatham, I was the head of the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee in Montgomery County back in 1989, before I had children, and working with and here learning from Doc Cheatham all the way along, and he's a legend in Maryland NAACP lore.
Oh, it is so good to see you, my friend.
Well, thank you.
Well, we're not done yet. We're also being joined by the one and only Carl Snowden.
Wow. I feel like I'm on Mount Rushmore of Maryland civil rights NAACP. So, Carl, great to see you. You know, as you know, Donnie, we started the first civil rights department in the history of Maryland at the AG's office, and there was nobody more fitting to run that unit than Carl Snowden. And we were able to make a lot of change. I mean, the power of the law to effectuate positive change cannot be overstated. And Carl knew that, recognized that, and we were able to do a lot of positive things in Carl's tenure at the Attorney General's office. So it's great to see Carl as well.
Donnie, Doc, how you doing?
I'm good, my brother. Good to see everybody.
But before we
Donnie,
go too
I want
far,
a copy of this.
Mr. Snowden, I want you to take a moment and acknowledge the op-ed that you allowed us to publish today on Henry Davis. Who was Henry Davis, and what is the significance of today?
Today is the 115th anniversary of the last man lynched in the city of Annapolis. Doug, it's an incredible story. It's a story that is often not told, and it's certainly it's not told at any of the universities, any of the local schools, private schools, etc. But the gist of it is this: on December 21st, 1906, 4 days before Christmas, a black man named Henry Davis was arrested for allegedly sexually assaulting a white woman. Annapolitans of that day decided that they did not want to have a trial. So the jail, which was located on Calvert Street, is exactly 3 blocks from the governor's mansion and the state house. So 50 men gathered, broke into the jail, took the man out of the jail. Doctor took him to St. John's College. St. John's College is one of the oldest colleges in America. Found a tree and proceeded to lynch him. But because of the weight of his body, the tree limb broke and he was still living. So they shot him 100 times, mutilated his body. And we would never know this story except an enterprising spectator took a photograph of this mutilated body and had it converted to a souvenir postcard and sold it for $3 for a quarter. So the Capital newspaper was able to get that gruesome photograph, and it got published. And no one was ever arrested or convicted for that trial, for that crime. And so today we observed it by at least reminding people that this incident took place 4 days ago. Incredible story.
And $3 for a quarter, it should be noted that postcards, that was the thing to do with lynchings.
It went all over the country. And the state's attorney, Doug, was a man named Green, who was the state's attorney in Anne Arundel County at that particular time. And Annapolis was then and is relatively a small city, so people know each other. What this particular lynching notable is the number of students from the Naval Academy and St. John's College that showed up. And the reason they knew they were students, because the uniform or attire they wore on that day determined whether they were students from St. John's College and the Naval Academy. Great investigation was done by both the Naval Academy, St. John's College, and the state's attorney's office. And they were unable to identify any person who participated in that lynching. Subsequently, no one was ever charged for it. So it's got a lot of feedback, Doni, since it was published today. And of course, people don't like to talk about that part of history.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Carl. I mean, it's, you know, and obviously we're in very, very different times now, but that legacy can never be forgotten, because that legacy is why we turn on the television and see black men, mostly black men, some women, throughout the country being shot down by police officers and others. That's how we got to where we are today. Now, there are people like yourself and Doc Cheatham and Donnie Glover who have been and dedicated most of their lives to working to overcome, not just in criminal justice, but that's one of the issues we hear about most today. And we need to keep going forward. And so thank you for sharing that story with us.
I'm not sure how much things have changed when I think of George Floyd, but let me fast forward to the topic du jour. Gentlemen, I'm watching the news without any sense that there is hope for my city. How do we fix the city of Baltimore?
Well, I mean, I don't know where you want to start, but vote for Doug. You know, I mean, look, and I'm half kidding, but it's unbelievable what's happened in Baltimore, and we used to not be able to talk about it because that would be, you know, you're not supposed to say things are rough in Baltimore, but after 8 years of Republican leadership and basically ignoring the plight of what is going on in Baltimore in terms of
you think that's
criminal
what
justice, you know, people dying on the streets and having, you know, vacant homes, schools that you can't send your children to.
You think that's the Republicans' fault, Mr. Gansler?
Well, it's not the Republicans' fault, but they have it's the soft spot in our state. It's the place that it's the jurisdiction in our state that most needs a governor. And so I do think that turning a blind eye to it, and if you look at what happened in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and almost every city across the country, there's been a renaissance. And Baltimore itself has more potential than any of those places with the brain power, the diversity, the #1 hospital in the world, the port. And one of the things that's interesting, you said, what am I been doing and what am I hearing? I'm up in Baltimore at least once or twice a week. You know, I was an Orioles season ticket holder back in 1989. I love Baltimore, and I worked there for the 8 years with Carl as Attorney General. And what you find are people that live in the city like you, and you're one of the shining examples, and Doc Cheatham as well, who love the city, see the potential, and are just frustrated every day not to have the leadership, and I mean collective leadership of the state and the city and the surrounding counties to do what can be done in Baltimore to turn it around. And I was sitting out, and I've told you this story. The day I decided to run for governor, I was sitting outside of Terra Cafe. I was going to go in and meet with Terrence Dixon and Casey Jenkins, and I was sitting there on the phone having a work call. I was late, and I looked out the window and watched people walking around seemingly without hope, and thinking to myself, you know, I can't fix Baltimore, but I can sure as hell try. And that was the minute I decided, yes, I can win this election, but I need to win the election because I need to work with people in Baltimore to help and nationally to turn it around and to go in and say, look, the answer can never be to any question. That's how we've always done it. Any bold idea is a good one. And let's work together to try and turn some of these issues around. And we need to start, frankly, with criminal justice and crime, because the number one function of government is to keep its people safe, and people do not feel safe and frankly are not that safe in Baltimore today.
Doc Cheatham.
Yes, sir.
How do we fix our city?
Well, I think I guess the urgent thing is to undo some of the harm that we've done to ourselves and the poor leadership that we have elected in the city of Baltimore. I can't say the state of Maryland, but I think we have failed ourselves to a great degree. When we look at the state senator and delegates, we look at the members of the city council, and for the most part, we can't blame Mr. Charlie in many cases. We got to blame African Americans that are Democrats for what my little lifetime here. I've been here 71 years, all of my life. I've never seen it this bad in so many different areas. I don't know of a positive area that I can talk about. You know, it's like we've done to ourselves some of the injustice that we are dealing with. And sadly enough, we've elected some young folks. I have to agree with PM Smith that was on Fox 45 last week when he chastised the poor leadership coming from these very intelligent and articulate young people that are taking seats. I haven't seen my United States Senator. I haven't seen my congressman. I haven't seen my state senator. I haven't seen my delegate. I haven't seen my city council person. And this is the end of 2021. I have not seen any of them. And I'm talking about Van Hollen. I'm talking about Infume. I'm talking about Antonio Hayes. I'm talking about Wells, Conaway, and Ampry. And I'm talking about Torrance. I haven't seen any of them all year. And we're wondering why we're in the plight that we're in. And most of these folks, half of these folks, are running for re-election next year. Infume, Van Hollen, Antonio Hayes, Wells, Conaway, and Ampry are all running for re-election. I'm telling my community up front, they don't deserve our votes. They've done nothing for us. I'm in a community that has suffered now 53 homicides this year. We have averaged 50 homicides a year for 7 years. You mean to tell me the mayor and these city council people could not have done something? And then we're throwing money away. We got a group called Safe Streets, don't even cover my area. You know, we got another group that's doing the fronting work. They're getting money, but they're actually being paid by an outside group of folks who don't look like me. Had a meeting last week that the mayor invited us to say, I hope to see you on his robocall, and he doesn't show up, nor does any elected official show up. We got to change the elected people that we have in Baltimore. And I'm saying the overwhelming majority, but communities got to rise up and do what they can to help us stay afloat until we can elect some new people.
Carl Snowden, how do we fix Baltimore? I know you're in Annapolis, but you bring a lot of wisdom, experience, and expertise to the equation.
Well, Donnie, one of the things I would suggest, and I say this to Doc with all due respect, the problem in Baltimore City is not something that just has happened in the last 4 years, or the 8 years, or 12 years. We cannot ignore the fact that how Baltimore came into existence. It's amazing how many people just don't even understand the history of the city, the systemic racism, the intractable poverty that exists there. It's a huge challenge that exists in the city. Here's an example of something. Both you and Doc are natives of Baltimore City. And I find when I ask people this question, even native Baltimoreans don't know the answer. And it's in your lifetime. And the question is, when the riot broke out with Freddie Gray, when was the last time Baltimore City had a riot prior to Freddie Gray?
47 years ago. Before
68. 68.
1968. Donnie, would you agree with that?
47 years ago, yes, sir. 47 years before 2015.
When I tell you this, don't take my word for it. Google it. You're wrong.
Okay.
It was in 1979.
Okay.
1979, February 1979. And I would challenge you, when you do Google the riot of Baltimore City in 1979, please read very carefully what the mayor of Baltimore City said in 1979 and compare it to what the mayor of Baltimore City said in 2015. In 1979, when you read the article, you're going to discover that the mayor at that time was William Donald Schaefer. And when the riot broke out in 1979, he called the people who during the rioting hoodlums, thieves, and criminals. In 2015, a Black woman, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, who was then the mayor, when asked about the riot in 2015, referred to the people as hoodlums and thieves. And I want you to pay attention to the history because it has a way of repeating itself. Most people living through Baltimore City, all of these various events that have occurred, we tend to have short memories. We tend not to remember these major events. And so my thinking is two things. And one of the things I totally agree with you, Doc, on, but it's a different perspective. I share this story and then I want to give this point. If you ask the average person, Black or white, why was Rosa Parks arrested? They always respond the same way. She was arrested, they said, because she refused to give up her seat to a white man. That's the standard answer. I had the great fortune of meeting Mrs. Parks in 1984, and I asked Mrs. Parks, what was she arrested for? And her response was, I was arrested because I refused to give up my dignity. That's totally different.
Totally different here.
The narrative is different. You get a whole different perspective. So who tells the story is important. So from my perspective, in terms of Baltimore City, we've got to rewrite the story. We've got to rewrite the narrative. We've got to talk about what's really going on in Baltimore City.
Well, why haven't we done that thus far? We have college degrees.
I want to give you.
We're not enslaved. We own properties. We got more degrees than ever before.
That's true. And what I wanted to give you was an example of what Doc was talking about in terms of leadership. But here's something that happens. And do correct me if this is not the case. You guys live in the city. You've had a scandal, right, with Mayor Dixon. You had a scandal with Mayor Pugh.
Did we have a scandal or did they create a scandal?
Well, here's my question. Did at any time, did any of the major Black institutions in Baltimore City, Morgan State University, Coppin, or any of the colleges in the city of Baltimore with their political science department, did they ever have a discussion why that scandal took place and what are the lessons to be learned from those scandals?
I would say no, but that's without knowing. I don't recall.
No, they have not. I can tell you that. And that's the problem. We have these issues that happen in our community. We don't pause. One of the things, Doc, you'd be interested in knowing, if here's an example that I use all the time. In Chicago, by the way, has more killings than Baltimore City. Believe it or not, it's incredible what's going on in Chicago.
Philadelphia does as well.
but here's this. Take this for example. In Chicago, despite the bloodbath that take place, here are the following men that live in Chicago who are not doing what you and I are doing right at this moment. In Chicago, the Reverend Jesse Jackson lives in Chicago. Minister Louis Farrakhan lives in Chicago. Barack Obama lives in Chicago. Do you know that those three men, influential men, have never gotten together collectively and say, what can we do, from our perspective, from our different positions, to help Chicago? Before we criticize those three men, believe it or not, in Baltimore City, the lieutenant governor, who happened to be an African American, your congressman, Mfume, the county executive, Calvin Ball, who lives in Howard County, your county executive in Prince George County, who happen to be an African American, and your mayor. They don't meet on a regular basis to talk about how they collectively, using their positions, can help to improve what's going on. So I agree with you, Doc, that we need our leadership to be more involved and more engaged. But I also think we need to hold people accountable at every level, not just on the elected officials level. My aunt lived in Baltimore. And when I used to come to Baltimore, she lived on Monroe Street, North Monroe Street. There was a phenomenon that took place in Baltimore City that you can maybe help me understand. When I used to come to Baltimore as a kid, Black people would be cleaning these marble steps. They would glisten.
I still have mine.
And remember the Afro Clean Block, where people got awards for having the cleanest block? That was not government imposed. That was people taking pride in the community they lived in. And I go up to North Avenue now, near with old Montgomery Wards, where my aunt lives at, and it's amazing what I see. And I think it's a manifestation of the lack of leadership at many, many levels, not just elected officials, but on many levels.
Let me jump in here. Mr. Gansler, if you were governor today, what would be your first steps to fix Baltimore?
You know, look, there's obviously not one panacea silver bullet, but what I would do is start focusing and go exactly what Doc and Carl have been talking about, which is show leadership. And I'd show up. It was funny, as you know, I was elected for 16 years, and then I lost the election to Anthony Brown 8 years ago, and we got a Republican governor as a result for the next 8 years. And shortly after that was Freddie Gray. And I got all these texts when people were rioting in the streets. I got all these texts. Aren't you glad you didn't win? You wouldn't want this to happen? I'm like, hell no. I mean, I'm watching Elijah Cummings, and Elijah and I got very close when we ran the Barack Obama campaign in Maryland. And he's out there with his megaphone. And I'm thinking, I'd be right there. I'd be in the streets talking to people and working with folks to sort of quiet that immediate situation, but to address some of the things we're talking about now, which are long-term issues. So what I would do is literally take an issue, whether it's housing, public safety, public health, education, jobs, or what have you, and put every 3 weeks or every month, whatever it is, put the stakeholders, the leaders that are in Baltimore that work on that particular issue in the room, a big room, take the folks from around the country that work on those issues, that see things in other places that have worked to help a turnaround. And the only thing you cannot talk about is what's always been done. And any idea is a good one. And start to address specifically what the issues are and how we're going to fix them.
Let me give you one. Vacant houses. We're in 2021. And I've been in touch with people on the Senate Judiciary Committee. I have not yet heard, correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, anybody making noise about vacant houses. Let me tell you why. They constantly require police attention, fire department attention, and Department of Public Works attention. One property repeatedly gets calls. And there's no legislation that I know of, help me out, to take that property from this trifling landlord or anything. Why?
Well, one, from my vantage point, we have a lot of community leaders that are my age and a few older that have they reached a time and period when they need to step down, including me, and turn it over to young people. The problem is we don't have young people intelligent enough about their own communities to help us. I had
Is that what you
363.
mean? Is that what you mean? That's not really what you mean. You haven't connected with the right young people yet. That's kind of what you mean,
No,
right?
no, no, no. I'm saying what I experience every day. I'm in my street every day. I have a city councilman, uh, James Torrance, who thinks a food desert is a mile or more. I mean, didn't he read the John Hopkins report? Didn't he read the health department report that's a quarter of a mile? I have young people in office. I'm talking, I put emphasis on in office don't know the problems and issues of the community, will not address it, and are going to run for reelection if we don't tell folks don't vote for any of them. You know, uh, I remember the time when you always saw your elected official. As I said earlier, I haven't seen any of the ones that I named all year. All year. We have 50 boarded up in vacant houses on North Avenue on my side of North Avenue from the 2200 block to the 1800 block. 50 vacant and boarded up houses on a major street in Baltimore City. But that's typical all over Baltimore City. Crime connotes crime. And we're saying we may have 10,000 boarded up and vacant houses, all kind of trash and garbage. And folks are wondering why we in the predicament that we in. We got elected officials have done us a disservice. It's time to make a change. But during that interim, we said the churches got to wake up. We got 500 and some churches. They can't walk 2 blocks out of their church and people know who they are because they don't have a relationship with their church. I'm begging community presidents, get active until we can bring in some newly elected folks. And the majority, 99%, do not deserve to be reelected because they haven't done anything for us and we haven't seen them.
Mr. Snowden, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Now, Mr.
Well,
Gansler, he has to promote the Democratic Party. But I got to ask you, Mr. Snowden, have they failed us?
You're referring to the Democratic Party.
Yes.
I think the answer to that is not no. I think what has happened is the Democratic Party has to be challenged. I got to tell you, I'm just a student of history. I remember Perrin Mitchell. And by the way, you're absolutely right, Doc, when you said elected officials meeting people on the street. Perrin Mitchell was so connected to the community. People call him PJ. You could actually walk up to him. Here's what I think the problem is, and I want to answer your question directly on the Democratic Party. But one of the things I think as a community we need to do collectively is to move people from being many celebrities back to public servants. Too many people see themselves as these many celebrities. They think if they come to your event, they're doing you a favor, as opposed to the other way around. And I think it's real easy to get that changed, but just educating voters. And once voters begin holding people accountable, the behavior change.
No, Mr. Snowden. Mr. Snowden, I got to jump in just for a second. Doc Cheatham has been educating voters for as long as I've known him. He's registered more people to vote than anyone I know in the state of Maryland. How much education do we have to do?
Well, let me just try to do the long history piece and see if you agree with this. You asked about the Democratic Party have they failed us. And from what I gathered and what I've seen is that when we as a community make up our minds to do things, we do incredible things. To use electoral politics as an example.
Like when?
I'm gonna give you three examples, all historic, all factual. Just check it out. We're about to celebrate the birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. That didn't happen by accident or coincidence or happenstance. We organized, energized, and galvanized the community. Ronald Reagan was president of the United States. He did not want to sign the bill to make King's birthday a national holiday. He said it publicly. But the masses of our people were determined to have that happen. There's a man named Nelson Mandela that walked out of a prison into the presidency because of people of color. People forget that the Reverend Jesse Jackson, who was running for president of the United States, was the first and only candidate to make South Africa a major issue. South Africa was not on the policy of American political agenda at that time. So when we engage with the Democratic Party, when we put forward an agenda, we can make a difference. And these are historical facts. They are things that have happened in this country that would not have happened under the Democratic Party had it not been for people being a force within the Democratic Party making a difference. And I don't think one could argue that changing foreign policy to South Africa was not a major victory, or that getting King's birthday as a national holiday was not a major victory. And I know those of us who are too close to this now may not be able to appreciate this, but somebody asked me what I think the greatest accomplishment of Barack Obama was. And I know Barack Obama put more drones in Africa than any president, including Trump. I know that. And I know that there are a lot of things that Barack Obama could have done, should have done, and didn't do. But the one thing that nobody will be able to take from Barack Obama, I grew up where I never thought in my lifetime I'd see an African American in the White House. My grandchildren, Doc, you and I are but the same age. You're a little older. I got grandchildren who are old enough to have experienced a black man and woman in the White House, what that did to them psychologically in terms of what they think they're able to accomplish. We should not take that lightly.
But damn, it got turned around on J6 when people stormed the Capitol. I mean, that's not enough. The symbolism, that's like BWI Airport being named after Thurgood Marshall, but the $1.8 billion in expansion contracts not going to MBEs. I mean,
that comes to leadership, because I could tell you the very example you used with Thurgood Marshall is not true in Atlanta, Georgia, where Maynard Jackson used his great influence as mayor to bring in those minority contracts.
Right, but I'm talking about Baltimore, Mr. Snowden.
No,
I'm pointing out that it's leadership. It's leadership. It can happen, and it has happened.
but Donnie, I think, look, I think everybody's right here, and there's so much more that can and should be done, and leadership matters. And, if you look at the Democratic race for governor right now, there's a whole crowd in there. A bunch of them literally live in New York, just moved down. A bunch of them, most of them, more than half have never run for anything ever before, had no relationships with Maryland, and not run for, delegate, city council, anything. And that thought we're shaving that morning and thought they saw a governor in the mirror and thought, hey, that'd be a great starter job. Why don't I do that? And experience matters, especially in a time of crisis. I mean, to be able to come in and work on the issues that we're talking about in Baltimore, you need someone that's done it before. You need somebody that's, understand how the levers of government work. I mean, Carl was there when I was head of all the attorneys general in the country with the national mortgage foreclosure crisis, for an example. And what we did was we got almost $2 billion into Maryland, almost $2 billion. We fought the big banks. We took on the big banks. We kept thousands and thousands of people from being evicted and foreclosed upon. I mean, I think that might have been the last time I saw Doc Cheatham, when I was working with housing counselors in Baltimore City, to make sure people had access to that money. And so that's the kind of thing. I mean, you're talking about criminal justice reform. And again, I've been involved in criminal justice reform for a long time, but I also realize that crime disproportionately affects communities of color and underserved communities. And you can't just have somebody some consultant gives them a piece of paper and said, this is how criminal justice works. I'm running against people who literally don't know the difference between a conviction and an indictment and want to defund the police, and people in the streets of Baltimore are bleeding. And
Mr. Gansler, I got to tell you, you know what I think is criminal is when those contracts come out of City Hall and they have no MBE participation. When you have a black mayor, a black council president, and a black comptroller. To me, the people at City Hall are a part of criminal justice, ought to be a part of criminal justice reform as well. Baltimore City Public School headquarters 60 is passing. The school down the street, Augusta Fell Savage, they've got a 1.0 GPA. This is criminal. And there's no outrage, Mr. Gansler.
There ought to be, and there ought to be, and the MBE issue is a great one. It's also, you know, Baltimore City-based small businesses. I mean, there are so many small businesses, and we talk as Democrats about jobs, and we ought to. Jobs are important, but we need to support the businesses that provide those jobs as well, particularly minority-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and it can't be where the African-American guy goes to the meeting and then comes back and a bunch of white guys are there and get all the money. And so we have to not only have the contractors, but we have to have the primes on big contracts be minority owned. And we need to make sure that that actually happens and there's enforcement. I mean, that's what we did when I was in the Attorney General's office. We enforced the laws, but right now we're not seeing those being enforced.
Francho is going to try to say that he's been a bigger advocate for MBEs than anyone else running for governor. He's going to
say whatever he wants. The problem is there's always the truth, and so, you know, look, he's been the tax collector and he's been in office for 36 years and he's 74 years old too, so he's been around the block and he can speak to his own advocacy and what he's done for the minority community in the state of Maryland and who he surrounds himself with and all that, and that's fine. But
what's the difference between you and him? You're both from Montgomery County, right?
Well, I'm from Maryland. He's, I think, from Massachusetts, but we both live in Montgomery County now. Yeah, and I was I was an assistant United States attorney under Eric Holder as a homicide prosecutor for about 3.5 years of that. I was the state's attorney in Montgomery County. I put in community prosecution.
But you're no stranger to Baltimore.
Well, it matters because one guy's running the tax department and collects your taxes for a long time, and another guy's actually been involved in every piece of state government. In other words, we cleaned up the Chesapeake Bay. We did the environmental stuff. We did environmental justice. Carl Snowden's sitting here because we started the first civil rights. That's not why, but we started the first civil rights department. I've walked the walk, and where others have talked the talk. And I can win a general election. I mean, if you look at that Goucher poll that just came out a few weeks back, which said a moderate, this is going to be the most Republican year in our lifetime. And that poll said a moderate Republican in Maryland next year, the most Democratic state in the country, the moderate Republican beats the progressive Democrat by almost 20%.
Could it be because the Democrats have failed the Black community?
Can I chime in here?
Go ahead, Doc.
Can y'all see this document?
I'm 59 years old. I can't read if that was sitting in front of my face.
Just want you to see the document. This is a joke. This is the Black Caucus agenda for 2022.
For Maryland? For Maryland?
Maryland. This is their document. This is their Black agenda. It's an insult.
What does it say, Doc?
Huh? Wait a minute. The Democrats, for the large part now, the largest Black caucus we've ever had in the state of Maryland, are doing us a great disservice. A great disservice. This item that they have, their agenda, we sent them an agenda with a federal, state, and local areas for issues that they need to bring up. We gave them 18 items. They only covered 2 of the items that we had that we thought were imperative to our community. These folks are doing what I think everybody else is being allowed to do. We've been hoodwinked, we've been had, we've been led astray, we've been led amok by the Democratic Party and a large number of African Americans that they have done nothing. What can they say? It took them 12 out of 13 years. The last year, they finally decided to do something about HBCUs. Before that, we only had 3 people that fought for us. You know, it's sad what we have allowed ourselves to elect. You know, we gave them a listing of Black agenda items. And this is what they come up with. You got to get a copy of it. This is their agenda. It's sad. And these are the people going to represent us until next year's election. They all need to be kicked out. I remember this. And I'm broad brushing. During the riots, and I remember 68 and 2015 because both riots, my community had 15 buildings that were destroyed or damaged. Okay, I lived the riots, the Freddie Gray riots. I challenged Elijah to come to my community because he had not been here. And he took my challenge. He brought his staff with him. This was shortly after the riots. And at the end of the march, at the end of the walk, and I walked him through the 13 businesses that were hit just in my community during the Freddie Gray riots. And he said, Doc, I guess you're right. I've not been here. That's what we are encountering from these black elected officials that are Democrats. They haven't done a damn thing for us, and we need to kick all of them out.
Yeah, but we're just, we're at an interesting time now, Doc. I mean, if you look at sort of the statewide where we are, you have you'd like to think it's going to change, but it may or may not. You hope it would, where we have a black woman who's the Speaker of the House. We just got sworn in a black treasurer, one of the 3 people on the Board of Public Works. We have one of the 2 leading candidates for Attorney General is an African American. We have one of the 2 major candidates for comptroller is an African American. We have 5 people of color running for governor and many people of color serving, running for lieutenant governor. So you like to think that there's going to be some change there, but we have to win. And the governor's spot is important.
My concern with the Democratic Party is such a broad tent that black people get lost in the sauce. They come to us, Carl Snowden, at election time, but after the election, it's business as usual. The number one supporter, the number one voting bloc, look at Sandtown.
Somebody said, I got your back. Somebody said, I got your back. No George Floyd bill, 2 voting rights, nothing is done on it.
Let me tell you this.
Nothing is done.
Freddie Gray, the only thing that's come to Sandtown since Freddie Gray is a renovated Western District Police Station. Doc Cheatham and I were there when some so-called community leaders revealed to us that they had been working with Warhorse. And so we find out after the decision had been made that of all of the things that happened in Sandtown post Freddie Gray, the very first thing would be a renovated police station. And as if Mary Miller doesn't have a lot of money, she did her first commercial in front of Western District when she ran for mayor. And I still don't understand that logic. Help me, Carl Snowden.
Who were these? Were these Democrats?
Can I put this out to you guys? I guess one of the problems with longevity is you get around, you hear things repeating itself. And I've been around long enough to share something that I hope you will bear in mind. All right. In March of 1972, a group of people gathered in a place called Gary, Indiana. And there were people representing in terms of the African American community, the whole spectrum. One of them was a guy named Coleman Young, who some of you will know later went on to become mayor of Detroit. And I just want to share this for the viewing audience more than even you, because sometimes just knowing a little bit about history helps. Andy Young, who's still living, Andy Young happened to be at this particular conference. And there were the nationalists who were saying what we need to do is build a Back to Africa movement. We got to be in the spirit of Marcus Garvey. And he was represented, that faction was represented by some people. Then you had Jesse Jackson, who at that time had become the sort of head of the civil rights movement. He was making some argument, the need for us to put more emphasis on economic development. And then you had Black elected officials. And this is where Andy Young comes in at. And I think it's worth repeating the story. Andy Young came under huge criticism from people. And he told this story that him and King often would go into the South, go into these particular southern cities, and it would run into inevitably the mayor and the white power structure. And the white power structure would say the following to them: we want to bring about change, but it takes time. You're trying to push too hard. Time In order for change to come, it takes time. And of course, they didn't want to hear all of that. And they went on and pressed, and you know the rest of the history. Black people get elected to public office. And Andrew Young finds himself the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, now responsible for the future of that city. A group of black people come in to meet with Andy Young to demand that there be more changes. And Andy Young said his response, he found himself saying, now, brothers, you know, it takes time. Change don't come overnight. The point being made, we think that by putting people in, we automatically change systems. These are systems that have been in place for a long time, and we need to be able to dismantle systems. Now, here's the question I would have to both you and Doni, who I think have eloquently stated the case as a prosecutor as to what Democrats and many black elected officials have not done. The question becomes, what is the alternative? If you think the alternative is in 2024, we'll bring back Trump and his group and let them run it because, you know, these Democrats haven't delivered. If you think that is the solution, I beg to differ with you. I think that we either have to decide that we're going to make the Democratic Party live up to its creed, or we're going to have to become a third force. To suggest that if black people don't get all that they need, they got to give up, I think it's not the way to go. I don't think that's going to solve the problems.
See, I thought you were going to give me another option like the people of Western Maryland.
I just want to say one other thing about Maryland, too. Because, you know, and I believe me, I've got my own complaints when it comes to black elected officials. I do think you have to give the benefit. You got to give. I mean, you know, I can't just, it can't be a broad brush. The truth of the matter is, for all of us, and every one of us should be proud of this, the sweeping police reforms that came through the Maryland General Assembly, it's nothing to sneeze at. That was a major accomplishment. It didn't do all that needed to be done.
Why?
But what it did do, having been in no law enforcement. The Law Enforcement Bill of Rights was the strongest bill of its kind anywhere in the country. And thanks to people, some of them been around a long time, but you got to give Jill Carter her credit. Senator Carter was on the forefront of this, as was others. They were able to bring about that reform. And remember, just keep refreshing your memory, because I don't think you want to just keep harping that the Democrats are just awful. You mentioned something, Doc, that you got to give these people credit for. You're right that it took much longer to get the settlement for the HBUCs. You also got to remember, Governor Hogan vetoed it. Had it not been for the Democrats overriding that veto, we'd have a different situation. Not only did they override that veto, but this governor, Hogan, did not want to take the governor out of the process of parole. Democrats overrode that. So
I don't remember O'Malley being our biggest fan either, Mr. Snowden.
Again?
I don't remember O'Malley being our biggest fan, especially when it came to HBCUs.
You won't hear me say I told no O'Malley. I'll leave that for Doc to be his cheerleader. He's not, you know, that's not my cup of tea. But my only point
all I can say about Martin O'Malley, I'm the NAACP that filed the class action lawsuit against him. So I've been singing this problem with Democrats for a while. Called in 71, that was when I graduated from Coppin, and my gift was I went to this convention, and the motto that came from that convention was, "It's not the man, it's the plan. It's not the rap, it's the map." And I'm saying since then, we have not brought forth the map or the plan. We just keep electing these black Democrats over and over and not holding them accountable. Let me put this to the panel. Let's kick them out and vote some new folks in.
We have an attorney general's race. Anthony Brown has left his congressional seat to run for attorney general. Mr. Gansler used to have that seat no more than 24 hours after he announced his former running mate from 15 years prior pushes his wife out there. So now
you can't make that stuff up.
I thought we were friends, and as soon as I jump out there to run for governor in 2030, you put your
to give you some inside perspective. You know, a lot of times people don't pay attention. Just last month, when the governor of Virginia the Democratic candidate lost.
Terry McAuliffe.
You know, most people don't know what the backstory to that is. When I tell you what the backstory to it is, it's going to blow you away.
Was it not education?
No, it had nothing to do with education.
Okay, come on with it.
Here's the backstory to it. And I want y'all to, and we got to all begin to slow down and pay attention, because things are happening in America, in Virginia, which most of us lived through and have forgotten. Not the black people of Virginia. The current governor of Virginia, who's a Democrat, you will recall, had the black face. Y'all remember that?
Yep.
The whole controversy with the blackface.
Yep.
Well, the lieutenant governor in Virginia at that time was black. And as you know, in Virginia, the way it works is you can only serve one term, right? And then you have to step aside. So when this white governor, who had dressed in all black, could not run again, they called for him to step aside, but he didn't. The black lieutenant governor ran. When Terry McAuliffe got in, because of his money, he was able to win that primary. Black activists, Doc, I want you to hear me now. Black activists said, since they didn't support our candidate, we're not going to support their candidate. And they went out and told black people, do not vote, as a form of protest in Virginia, to let the Democrats of Virginia know that we were insulted, black voters were insulted, because they didn't get to support the Democratic Party. In the next 4 years, we'll see whether that was a good strategy. But that's the backdrop, and they never talk about that. Just as one other thing, because all of you are politically astute, every political pundit in the country said Democrats were in trouble because they lost the Virginia race. And most people bought that. But when you look at local races around the country, not only did people of color do well, they broke into areas that had never been done before. In Philadelphia, they passed a historic referendum. You cannot, if you're a police officer in Philadelphia, stop people for minor traffic infractions. Why is that important? Because in Philadelphia, when people are being stopped for minor traffic violations, they're mostly black and brown, and they wound up dead. That was a major reform they got through. A person of color won in Connecticut. The second black man ever to get elected mayor of New York won. They've had these historic wins all across the country.
I got to jump in, Mrs. Snowden, because I've been hearing this thing about not prosecuting low-level crime. Doc Cheatham, I have white addicts in my alley, on my street, breaking in vacants, squatting in houses. And so when Marilyn Mosby says she's not prosecuting low-level crime, it's left me, an average citizen, questioning whether I should pick up this baseball bat or call the police. And then when the police do come, they cannot arrest this white addict that's in my alley calling me the N-word. Now, I don't know about that not prosecuting low-level crime thing, because there's an adverse effect to it also.
Would you prefer if you have limited resources? Do you want to concentrate on?
I'm tired of the BS. Fix my damn neighborhood like they fixed Guilford. No more excuses.
It's not an excuse. The question is leadership. If you got limited resources,
if a black addict is over in Bolton Hill, they will lock his hind parts up quicker than a Baltimore speed camera.
Not if you said that you have a policy that doesn't do that. But my question to you is going to be, because I think I know why Maryland, the state of Maryland, has more black people incarcerated for longer periods of time than any state in the nation, including Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. In Maryland, you go to jail, you go for a long time. Doug was a former state's attorney. Here's an unwritten policy.
That's not true. Mr. Snowden, they just shot up a cop, and both of these guys were on probation or on parole or probation.
What part is not true, what I just said?
You said they go to prison for a long time.
No,
there are people who should be in prison who are not in prison. I'm not sure whose fault it is, but we have murderers walking the streets of Baltimore.
Donnie, you cannot argue that it's a fact. It's not something I'm making up. People,
you come walk these streets of Baltimore. You tell me what your facts say then.
Let me just make this point. In Baltimore, and in Maryland, and this has been done all over the country. Maryland does incarcerate for a longer period of time people of color than any other state. Now, of course, you can point out exceptions, which is what you're doing. But I'm telling you,
I'm saying come walk the streets of Baltimore and tell me if that logic makes sense. I want you to come to the open air drug markets where they're selling cocaine and dope in front of cops. You call the police, say, hey, come get these drug dealers. No police. You come and tell me if that logic, that ACLU philosophy is working. Doc, is it working in your neighborhood?
All I know is I got out the hospital last year, and I decided to get on the subway, and I got off the subway, and the guy said I thought he was calling out our quarterback's name that's playing for the Ravens. He wasn't calling out the quarterback's name. That was the name of the drug in our neighborhood. And I'm saying, what has been the party in charge of Baltimore City for the last 40 years?
Can I just
been the Democratic Party.
Wait a minute.
Been the Democratic Party. And I'm just going to make this point. I've never told anyone not to vote. I've registered more voters in this state since 71 than anyone. I've never told anyone not to vote. I am telling folks, get all of these elected officials out of office.
Here's what I want you and Doni to answer. Very direct. And I'm glad we're having a civil discussion. You can't have it both ways. Now, when you were the NAACP president,
that's bull. Hold up. When I go to Guilford, them people look like they living really nice.
You haven't heard my question yet. You called it before you haven't heard it. What I was about to say to you, because I remember this well, and this is the problem we have. When O'Malley was the mayor of Baltimore, when O'Malley put in place the very policies which Doni is saying he's advocating now, those policies were.
I did not say that.
Let me finish.
I did not say that.
That's what you're implying.
No. So let me articulate. Zero tolerance was all the way to the right. What we have now is all the way to the left. And if you listen to the show, you know we need something in the middle.
All I'm saying to you is,
I'm not advocating for zero tolerance.
Is the problem that we often have. This is why we need to have these discussions. The problem that we often have, and I've governed. I've been in elective office. So I understand how the process works. The problem is that if you go into the neighborhoods where you have this open drug market, and then you take the approach that others have taken in the past, which has been zero tolerance, we're not going to have an open drug market. I have not forgotten the infamous dropout squads in Baltimore City, where police officers would jump out of their car, beat the hell out of people, including innocent people, I might add. Mm-hmm. And there were those of us who said, hold it. Not only are you not going to do this, you talk about Bolton Hill, it's not going to be done in any part of the city. And it went to an extreme. What Marilyn Mosby is arguing, and I think it's worthwhile considering, if you got limited resources, and she does, limited resources.
They found the cop killer in a few days. They found him.
I got that. The
13-year-old girl around the corner, they got shot in front of everybody. No killer.
Right. I understand that. How does that refute the point I was about to make? If you got limited resources, don't you want those resources to be concentrated on violent crime? Are you more interested in getting people who are killing people off the streets than someone urinating? That's the question.
Mr. Gansler, we got one last question. Michael Haney poses it. What's the difference between you, O'Malley, Perez, and Francho?
Everything. Well, I wouldn't know where to start except for, look, I think if you got to look at what we've done to know what we're going to do. And if you look at what these guys have done, and I'm not going to say anything negative about them, but you just look at what their history is in terms of how they've helped Baltimore City, people in Baltimore City, communities of color, underserved communities, and look what I've done for that. I mean, I started Inner City Lacrosse League in Baltimore 12 years ago. I didn't have to do that. We had 500 kids. We get them into schools. We work with inner city kids. We mentor. I mean, I'm on the board of College Track. I'm on the board of Year Up. I mean, it's and what I did as state's attorney in terms of criminal justice reform. You're talking about the drug problem. one of the things we did, we put the first drug courts in the history of Maryland. And drug courts work because you have to understand those people that are coming to those drug dealers have an addiction. They have a health problem. And you have it's not a binary thing. You don't have a, let's not prosecute any people using drugs or let's lock them up for 20 years. Instead, you take those folks, you get them in a drug court, you give them an incentive to get healthy and be productive members of society instead of putting them in a cage. And drug courts work. I mean, that domestic violence courts work. We started the first one of those in Maryland's history. We had a family justice center, which is a wraparound thing. It's in Rockville, Maryland. The success cannot be overstated in terms of helping families in need. We need to have those everywhere in the state. We need to have a mental health program that actually works. Things that I've actually done throughout the course of my time. And we haven't even touched on some of the major issues that are coming up, along with criminal justice reform, climate change. I think that matters. Women's reproductive rights are in jeopardy going forward. So all of this is, there are a lot of issues in Baltimore, no question. And we need to have somebody at the top in the governor's chair that cares about those issues. Part of it, and Doc Cheatham was sort of saying this earlier, a lot of it in politics is showing up. And if you show up, you talk to the folks that are on the ground, you can go into any neighborhood in Baltimore, any neighborhood that's, let's just call it a rough neighborhood, and ask somebody, who's the grandmom that's giving the kids cookies? Who's the gang? Who's in the gang? Who are the bad guys? You can find out in 30 seconds who's in there. And that's where you ought to be focusing your resources, because some people are controlling and scaring those neighborhoods, and people are dying. And politics is all fun and games and nice and all that. You can have, you can go. I'm running against a bunch of guys that are nonprofit fundraisers. They're raising all the money and all that. That's not going to clean up the streets of Baltimore. You need somebody with experience. So I'm looking forward to the race. I'm looking forward to. I can't wait to get started to work with the three of you on this call and the people that are calling in on the call, and to make sure that we actually address the problems of Baltimore and just don't say it's incorrigible. We can't fix it, because we can. Other cities have been fixing. There's too many people that care deeply, deeply about Baltimore City that want to help. All they need to do is be given an opportunity to help.
Dr. Cheatham, final thought.
I would close and say this, that we're in the plight that we're in, not because of Republicans. This is a Democratic city here. We're in the plight that we're in today because we as voters have not elected the right people to serve us. I am strongly encouraging folks to register to vote and to vote. I registered more people in the state of Maryland than anyone. Never tell anyone not to vote. But I'm saying this next year, 99% of the folks in office need to be voted out. Need to be voted out. They don't deserve our vote. Let's bring in a new crew. Definitely register. Definitely vote. But this crew, be they senators, delegates, they all need to be out.
Mr.
I would just end by, again, I think history is a good thing to do. For those who are watching and listening, please take a moment to Google Baltimore, Maryland, Riot, 1979. Read carefully the Washington Post story. Pay attention to the comments that have been made by elected officials, black and white, during that era. And tell me after you've read the article how much has changed. By the way, the riot took place at Old Town Mall. It was called in East Baltimore in 1979. And believe it or not,
that was only in one part of the city, Cole.
And believe it or not,
my community didn't get hit that year. It couldn't have been a riot.
Believe it or not,
I call it a riot when it only hit one part of the city.
And believe it or not, in 1979, something happened then that has never happened again in Baltimore City. Baltimore has two things that can be noted for historically. The only baseball game ever played ever before where there was no audience took place in Baltimore City.
I was doing Freddie Gray.
Right, doing Freddie Gray.
I thought you were going to say the number was 666 when Ronald Reagan got elected. Okay, we got to run, gentlemen. Mr. Gansler.
And the second thing was just that the riot took place in February in the winter. Totally unexpected.
Hey, Donnie, this was a real treat. Hearing
it was
Carl
indeed.
and Doc, and anytime you're looking for a fourth square on your puzzle.
Let's do it again.
Put me in. I can talk about these issues all night, and then I can't wait to help solve those issues. So thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
We need a food market in zip code 17.
Amen. And food insecurity is a huge issue. I mean, 25% of people went to a food bank during COVID.
In a democratic city.
Needed some security.
Mrs. Snowden, thank you for your patience. Thank you for teaching us. I will read and learn more. Thank you for making sure we learn our lesson.
King dinner. It's going to be in BWI Airport, BWI Western Airport. It's going to be on January 14th.
I'll be there.
Let's come through it.
So you're gonna send us a flyer so I can get it up, right? Or did you send it?
Remember, you were going to go and look at the website that I told you was already on the website.
What's that website?
It's MLK. It's www.mlkjrmd.org. www.mlkjr, Martin Luther King Jr. MLKJR, for Maryland.org.
99% of the people celebrating Martin Luther King, if they were living during his time, they weren't members of the SCLC. They aren't members now. And I say it's an insult. I'm a past president of the SCLC. I don't know where all these SCLC people come from.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.